Welcome back, artists. I'm Wyatt Paints, and today, somebody moved my camera? Well, this week is my first model revisit. My client that had me make the Predator statue way back when would like me to go and make another skull, but this time, not so meaty and more of a Pirates of the Caribbean theme, which is a can do. I'm going to be using a lot of the same steps and techniques that I used last time, so it should be easy peasy. And I also picked up some natural materials so I can lock in that tropical vibe. But time is a wasting, and I've got to do some extra prep before I even get started on this one. So meet me over at the painting table. I'm going to grab my brushes. Let's get started. Now, for this goal, you'll notice I elected to fully assemble before beginning any work. This is due to the omission of the meat and gore. Without them, I'm going to need to address the main seam on each vertebrae and handle the layer lines that show up on the top surface of any FDM print. And as you can guess, it made every step more complicated, but it had to be done. With this kind of surfacing job, I use Tamiya putty. Be sure to wear gloves and work in a well-ventilated space. For this first pass, I'm using it at full thickness straight from the tube, and really working it into the seam. I'm not too concerned about making it pretty, as all of this will need sanding anyways. The goal should solely be filling in all the side seams as well as you please. When it comes to the top surfaces, you're going to want to thin down the putty with a touch of IPA. This will loosen up the putty and let it flow and settle better, and it'll go a long way in keeping the surface nice and smooth, saving some time on the final sanding around all those details. After letting everything dry, that big seam is still really noticeable, so it's sanding time. Be sure to wear a respirator on this part, you really don't want to breathe this dust in. Now, when sanding, keep your stroke perpendicular to the seam to sand efficiently. Also, FYI, this is really the work part of the process, and is always the source of my blisters, so you won't be alone if your fingers are sore. Sometimes, art is ouchies. For the top, it's going to be a lot of tight spaces, so really lock in and be diligent on all the nooks and crannies. We really don't want to rely on heavy weathering to cover up a subpar surface, especially on these spine peaks, as they're going to get a lot of attention.
A few moments later.
After sanding, I gotta admit, it's looking a lot rougher, but that's besides the point. Move on. Now it's time to add a second finishing coat of putty. this time thinning it down to a slurry so that it gives me a nice and smooth finish. Just be thorough and meticulous as you work this across the entire surface of the spine. By the time this step is done, only the harshest of seams will still be apparent. More sanding and putty passes can get these invisible, but it would cost a lot more time and putty, so it's a question of diminishing returns. Right here is about the sweet spot. By this point, watching me wrangle the spine, you're probably thinking, hey, that's going to be a real pain to prime, isn't it? Yep. And we're back to the painting table with a nicely primed skull and spine. Now, we're dealing with a lot of surface area, so I'm gonna base this with craft paint so I don't set my wallet on fire. A basic brown will do just fine. As usual, using this paint is an exercise in patience. Even simple base coats are gonna require a bit of coddling. First off, lay it down fast and a bit thicker than you would with a hobby paint. Then give it at least 20 minutes to fully dry before you attempt a second coat, and then maybe a third. Using a giant brush like this helps me cover area fast, and the long bristles will come in handy when you get to the spine and need to commit lots of brush abuse. Because let's face it, dealing with this much articulation is gonna require a bit of brutality. I promise to give the big dumb brush a nice conditioning after. One thing to keep in mind though, even completely dry, this paint is super delicate and will rub off if you look at it wrong. To mitigate this, touch up any rubbed off spots and give the whole skull a few coats of matte varnish to save your work. All brown and protected, but this won't be the last time the durability of the paint will plague me. It's just the cost you pay when you fully assemble before painting. So just be ready to do frequent touch-ups and varnish save points as you go. Let's get some dusky skull down. Using a damp brush, I'm laying down something close to a base coat, but I'm not looking for complete coverage. I really want that dark brown to be an influence in the shaded areas. Having a damp brush before adding paint will help keep things slightly transparent to allow that influence. And since the top of the skull should get the most color, making your first stroke near the top and then evening it out as you move towards the bottom should make the subtle transition a bit easier to pull off. And don't forget about that spine. This skull is going to be laying flat, so concentrating this on the side and top will help you focus your efforts. And don't be afraid of leaving some harsh transitions here. The more dramatic shading will give more definition to the segments. Just focus on creating the more subtle shifts along the top and slight ribbing. Once it's dry, another varnishing is in order. Otherwise, all our work will be at risk. While I wait for the varnish to cure, I figured I'd take a second to thank my subscribers over on Patreon. These champions of art and fine taste are the pillars that hold the Hall of Greatness together, and I can't thank you enough. If you would like to join the Painting Pantheon, you'll find a link to it below. Even as a freemium member, you'll get insights and behind-the-scenes peeks of upcoming projects. Or you can support the channel right here by subscribing and liking the video. And that's it, no more begging for attention. That varnish should just be about dry. Let's get back to it. For the first highlight, skeletal bone seems more than appropriate. For this color, I'm using Big Floof with a medium dry brush and looking for about 60% coverage. And since this shade is so close to the previous, I can leave it pretty chunky with very little blending. As it dries, the shades will normalize with each other. Just start with the top areas of the spine and let that dictate how heavy you want to apply it to the side ribs. But lean on the lighter side. The subtle contours here can be lost very fast. On the skull, the focus should be on the major features getting solid coverage, so brows, cheekbones, the bridge of the nose, then feathering the highlight off the key shade areas, like the hollow between the cheek and the nose and the subtle surfacing above the teeth. As you work across the skull, lighten up your touch so you can softly catch the surface texture. This is where you're going to build up that classic bony look. Just take it nice and slow. Keeping strict control of your paint load is what's going to build that surface texture. So ride the brakes the whole time. As a final highlight, I used pale sand just to kiss all of the major details to give them that much more pop. Honestly, I think it's this step that really brings it all together. Now, let's rewind back to Dusty Skull and dial in those teeth. While you could just leave them as is, giving them an individual attention will look substantially better. So base each tooth while avoiding the cavities in between. We're gonna reinforce those shadows later, but the cleaner you paint here, the easier that'll be. Then, just like the bone, work your way up through the same shades, using the shape of each tooth to be your guide. With everything dry, a bit of light tone is just what we need to deepen those shadows. This first pass will be at full strength and very directed. This needs to be pushed into the deepest areas. There can be a little bit creeping out, but keep it focused on those roots. For a second pass, thin it down and use it as a general wash over all of the teeth. This will help normalize and blend those highlight layers. Finally, for the rest of the skull, give the skull plates a heavy detailed shade, followed by a thin down overall wash. And pay attention around the vertebrae. They can be kind of tricksy. Just take it one bone at a time. Once you're happy, let it dry and give it a varnish. In fact, give it an extra 2 varnishes to be safe. It's gonna need it. Now it's time to get dirty. And since this skull is life-size, adding some weathering can be as simple as going outside and grabbing some sandy dirt. If you do go outside for some basing material, be sure to send it through your microwave for a minute or two to make sure you don't have any hitchhikers. To set the sand, I used a tool from our past, Elmer's glue. It has that flavor that just takes me right back to kindergarten. Let's begin in a nice safe area, someplace where we're gonna put a significant amount, like in the eye socket. This is a perfect job for a sacrificial brush. Just paint the bottom surface with some glue. Then drizzle on some dirt. You'll want to put on a little bit more than you think you need, and then slightly tap down the dirt into the glue. After the first one, you should have a good idea how the sand's going to look, so you can be a bit more generous with the glue area. Just be careful on how far up the wall you apply glue. It's a judgment call, but a reliable rule is, if the surface is vertical, you've gone too far. It's okay, just clean off your brush and wipe away the excess glue. While the glue will hold a lot of the sand down, there needs to be a bit more to secure the top sand. Thinning down Elmer's glue with a touch of water can help it soak in. In my case, the sand was so hydrophobic I had to use a pipette to cool a bunch of it in there and then suck out the excess. And don't worry, while it's wet it looks white, but it dries clear. When it comes to the spine, a messy application is fine. Mixing the basing material into glue and then gently rubbing it onto the vertebrae. Just be super careful here as you don't want to sand off your paint job. Also, it might look a little dark now, but that's just because it's all wet. Once it's dry, it'll lighten back up to its original tone. This leads me to a teaching moment. Always protect your workspace. I ended up gluing an embarrassing amount of sand to my board. and leaving it there isn't an option as it's going to scratch up my future projects. Thankfully, there's this French technique I use called scraping. In the meantime, all the glue had time to dry and the varnish coat to boot. Go web go. Webs of moss, that is. It's just the thing to add that tropical feel. You can pick up a bag of moss at your local pet store for about $8, but it's going to be very dry and stiff. So soak it in a bit of hot water for a few minutes to get things nice and loosey-goosey. For light applications, a few spots of Elmer's glue will do. Just keep in mind this won't hold onto thick clumps. You can only really guarantee a hold on the few fibers that are touching the glue. So take it easy or you'll find chunks falling out. And when you're doing the spine, skip around to get more of a random growth pattern. After just a few short minutes, we have a nice light growth of moss. But for my client, he wants mossy. So first, I'm gonna piece together a small mossy plinth. But for something this bushy, I'm gonna need a glue with a bit more grab. So I subbed in a hot glue gun. Just remember which parts get hot and you should be fine. Point, pull, get a good blob, and then press the center mass of the moss into the glue. And don't worry if it gets a bit matted. You can always tease it out or trim it down later. And since my client said heavy moss, I went back and really loaded it up. Once I stuffed most of the cracks and crevices, it was looking finished, so I went ahead and called it done. And yo ho me matey! This skull came out great. Nice creamy colors that pops of green with a good amount of all over grit just suggests these bones have been abandoned by the sea years ago. It could easily fit on any pirate set. Hopefully this video has given you some confidence to tackle worn and weathered bones yourself. It only takes a few steps and a bit of bravery to do them. If you enjoyed the video, it'd be awesome if you leave a like. If not, maybe on the next one. Speaking of which, I better get cracking because the next one is a doozy. So, as always, thank you for watching, stay creative, and always enjoy the process.